You place your faith in the solid ground below you. It appears firm and reliable. You depend on the atmosphere flowing through your lungs. It seems unchanging. And most importantly, you believe that physical laws are carved in granite, immutable and eternal. Mass attracts mass. Radiation moves swiftly, and matter sticks together. This consistency forms the bedrock of your mental stability. It enables you to anticipate what's coming, to construct civilizations, and to rest peacefully without fearing that existence will just evaporate. Scientific understanding, by and large, validates this comfort. We've been instructed that existence operates like machinery following rigid, predictable principles. Yet here's the uncomfortable reality. That sensation of security is nothing more than a mirage. It's a mental shortcut, not a fundamental truth. When theoretical physicists examine the mathematical formulas that truly describe existence, the underlying programming of particle physics and space-time curvature, they don't observe an unshakable foundation. They witness something far more delicate. The calculations indicate that our cosmos might not represent the ultimate stable configuration of existence. It could merely be a provisional stage, a precarious equilibrium awaiting a gentle push to topple it. We're not discussing meteor strikes or stellar explosions, events that annihilate biological systems while leaving the universe's structure standing. We're discussing frameworks that propose natural law itself can transform instantaneously, mercilessly. And the most unsettling aspect? These aren't conspiracy theories from obscure corners of the web. These represent the rational outcomes of our finest understanding. The mathematics are suggesting we're existing on limited time. So pose this question to yourself. Do you wish to discover just how far this goes? Because after you perceive the cosmos as a delicate sphere, rather than an impenetrable fortress, you'll never recapture that genuine sense of safety. Understanding why researchers are concerned requires examining the distinction between representation and actuality. Our sensory apparatus provides us with a representation. It's a practical interface wherein furniture appears solid, temporal progression moves in one direction, and void appears empty. But theoretical physics investigates actuality, the subatomic reality beneath. And within that realm, conditions are turbulent. Elementary particles materialize and vanish. Dimensional fabric bends and distorts. Temporal flow varies. Typically, we presume this turbulence remains limited to the microscopic realm. We assume, certainly, atomic behavior is peculiar, but the overall structure stays stable. Yet suppose the overall structure proves equally precarious. Throughout the past 100 years, theoretical science has identified multiple mechanisms, traps essentially, woven into reality's fabric. These represent scenarios wherein the fundamental parameters of nature might transform. Picture if electromagnetic interaction intensity suddenly altered by a single percentage point. Just one. Immediately, every atomic structure composing your body would disintegrate. Or picture if gravitational force grew marginally more powerful. Celestial furnaces would implode, and planetary bodies would be pulverized. We regard these parameters as permanent configurations on a cosmic control panel. Yet the frightening hypothesis proposes they aren't permanent. They're fluid. They can transform. And if transformation is possible, they can eliminate us. Not through biological termination, but through ontological erasure. We're about to examine 10 particular frameworks wherein scientific understanding forecasts a bleak conclusion or a disturbing reality. We'll proceed in a descending pattern. We commence with the physical cosmos, the foundation. Subsequently, we transition to biological existence across the galaxy, the wilderness, then to cognition, the perceiver, and ultimately to being itself. This isn't merely an enumeration of apocalyptic scenarios. It's a journey into existential terror. We're about to strip away your comfort layers one after another. Initially, we'll examine the unstable void, the concept that emptiness itself essentially represents a primed trap awaiting activation. Subsequently, we'll address strange quark matter, a substance so energetically favorable, it contaminates and demolishes everything it contacts. These constitute the physical dangers. Beyond that, we'll look outward. If the cosmos proves physically survivable, why does it appear so desolate? We'll examine the hostile cosmos hypothesis and the developmental barrier, the likelihood that we're being stalked or that we're already condemned. That's the survival danger. Subsequently, we'll redirect focus inward. We'll question your capacity to accurately perceive existence with the simulation hypothesis and causal determinism. Are you an active participant or merely programming? And ultimately, at the spiral's base, we'll face the most intimate terrors: random consciousness fluctuations and perpetual awareness. Frameworks proposing termination isn't the conclusion, but something considerably worse: an inescapable consciousness prison. Upon completing this exploration, external reality will appear identical, but will resonate profoundly differently. The cosmic void's stillness will feel more oppressive. Matter's apparent solidity will feel fraudulent. Let's commence with the most pressing danger. The foundation beneath you isn't merely minerals and geology, it's an energy configuration, and it might be deceiving you. Let's discuss the metastable vacuum. This framework emerges directly from the physics surrounding the Higgs particle, the elementary particle identified at CERN during 2012. The Higgs configuration exists everywhere. It saturates the complete cosmos, providing particles their inertial property. You might conceptualize it as the background medium wherein all matter exists. For the cosmos to exist as observed, the Higgs configuration requires stability. Within physics, stability concerns energy configurations. Picture a sphere descending a slope. It descends until settling in a depression at the base. Once positioned there, it remains. It's stable. We presume our cosmos occupies that depression, the minimal achievable energy configuration, the genuine void. Yet calculations propose something disturbing. We might not occupy the slope's base. We might be lodged in a shallow depression partway down the incline. This is termed a metastable configuration, or an unstable void. It appears stable because the depression's boundaries are elevated enough to prevent the sphere from descending further. We've remained on this platform for 13.8 billion years, constructing stellar systems and societies, assuming we're on solid ground. Yet beyond the barrier, there exists a deeper depression, a reduced energy configuration, and nature perpetually seeks the minimal energy configuration. The sphere desires to descend. If it occurs, if the cosmos transitions from our present void into the genuine void, the physical laws as understood immediately cease functioning. How might this transpire? In traditional physics, the sphere remains in the depression unless physically displaced. Yet in quantum theory, particles can accomplish something termed penetration. They can simply traverse barriers. They extract energy from nothing, materialize beyond the barrier's opposite side, and descend. The calculations suggest the Higgs configuration could ultimately penetrate the energy obstacle protecting us. It requires occurring at merely one isolated location across the complete cosmos, just one subatomic position, wherein the configuration drops to the reduced energy configuration. That generates a sphere of genuine void. Because the alternative configuration proves more energetically advantageous, this sphere proliferates. And it doesn't proliferate like expanding fabric. It proliferates at radiation's velocity. This constitutes the catastrophic scenario. Because it advances at radiation's velocity, you cannot detect its approach. Radiation transmits information. If the sphere approaches you at radiation's velocity, the information regarding its arrival contacts you at the precise instant as the destruction. You wouldn't observe illumination. You wouldn't detect warnings. One instant you're consuming beverages, contemplating your schedule. The subsequent instant you simply aren't. Your atomic structures disintegrate before your neural system can register the indication that something's amiss. It's the supreme, undetectable terminator. What transpires within the sphere? It's not merely an eruption. An eruption demolishes matter while leaving physical laws standing. Void transformation demolishes the laws themselves. Within the sphere, the Higgs configuration's characteristics differ. This indicates particle masses transform. The interactions maintaining atomic cohesion, electromagnetism, the nuclear interactions, discover alternative parameters, or vanish completely. Chemical processes become unfeasible. Atomic structures cannot configure. Elementary particles might decay. The complex biological architecture composing your genetic material would simply unravel and dissolve into turbulent fundamental particle chaos. It's a complete reinitialization of the cosmos, a catastrophic failure for existence. And the sphere doesn't halt. It continues proliferating, consuming stellar clusters, devouring planetary systems, rewriting the cosmos into a configuration that cannot sustain biological systems. It's a comprehensive, violent deconstruction of every structure that ever manifested. Could it transpire immediately? The likelihood proves minuscule, yet non-zero. Certain physicists contend the cosmos possesses a finite duration, and we're merely gambling against chronology. Others propose that extreme energy occurrences across the cosmos could initiate it. Yet the most disturbing aspect? It might have already commenced. A billion radiation years distant, a sphere might be proliferating presently. We won't discover it for a billion years, or it might exist beyond our planetary system, arriving in 5 minutes. We're thoroughly blind to the executioner's movements. Void transformation proves terrifying because it assaults emptiness itself. It informs us that the nothing separating atoms proves unstable. Yet certainly, you might assume, the atoms themselves prove secure. Matter appears solid. We've manipulated elementary particles for a century, and they appear dependable. We construct infrastructure from metallic alloys and respire molecular oxygen. These substances don't merely spontaneously decide to transform into something alternative. Yet, suppose they could. Suppose there exists a matter configuration that's more thermodynamically perfect than the matter composing us. In nature, there exists a merciless principle. The stable consumes the unstable. Metallic iron proves stable. So radioactive heavy elements ultimately decay into lead. It pursues stability. The catastrophe emerges if something exists more stable than our elementary particles. This introduces us to the subsequent framework on our Terra spiral. Strange quark packets. If void transformation represents the foundation collapsing beneath you, strange quark packets constitute a contagion, a parasitic plague for subatomic particles. And unlike the void sphere, which might commence billions of radiation years distant, this danger could be generated precisely here within our own research facilities. Understanding strange quark packets requires examining a neutron star's interior. These represent massive celestial bodies' remains, compressed by gravitational force so intensely that atomic structures implode. Within, elementary particles are compressed collectively into concentrated material. At these extraordinary pressures, the elementary components, the minute particles composing elementary particles, can transform. Conventional matter comprises up-type and down-type components. Yet, within the neutron star's compression, some convert into strange-type components. This combination generates strange quark matter. The hypothesis proposed by theoretical physicists like Edward suggests strange quark matter might constitute the authentic foundational configuration of nuclear matter. In straightforward language, it's more stable than conventional matter. It's the thermodynamically perfect nucleus version. A tiny fragment of this strange quark matter is termed a strange quark packet. If strange quark matter indeed proves the optimal configuration, then conventional matter proves metastable, precisely like the unstable void. It desires to transform into strange quark matter. It merely requires initiation. A strange quark packet functions as initialization. It doesn't respect conventional chemistry principles. It disregards electronic configurations and molecular interactions. It engages directly with the atomic nucleus. Here's the scenario. Picture a subatomic strange quark packet, smaller than an atom, drifting through emptiness. It impacts Earth. Because it's extraordinarily heavy and concentrated, it doesn't halt at the surface. It descends directly through the geological layers, heading toward the central core. Throughout its journey, it contacts a conventional atom. Immediately, the strange quark packet consumes the atom. It reorganizes the components within the atom's nucleus, converting them into strange-type components. The atom ceases existing as metallic iron or silicon and transforms into strange quark packet portion. This procedure releases energy. Yet more significantly, the strange quark packet just expanded. Currently, it possesses enlarged surface area, enabling it to contact additional atoms. It transforms into uncontrolled reaction, a chain reaction, not combustion, but transmutation. The strange quark packet descends to Earth's central region and commences consuming the planetary body from within outward. It converts the central core, subsequently the intermediate layer, subsequently the geological surface. Within several hours, the complete Earth reduces to an extremely hot, chemically inert sphere of strange quark matter, approximately the dimensions of an athletic stadium. No biological systems, no historical record, merely a concentrated, radiating sphere of strange material. This constitutes the crystallization catastrophe scenario for particle physics. Currently, the skepticism verification. Why hasn't this transpired previously? We understand cosmic radiation impacts lunar surface with extraordinary energy, yet lunar body persists. If cosmic radiation generated strange quark packets, lunar body should have been converted billions of years previously. This lunar security reasoning constitutes the primary justification physicists rest peacefully. It proposes strange quark packets prove either unfeasible to generate or they prove unstable and disintegrate rapidly. Yet there's a complication. Cosmic radiation collisions prove unregulated and chaotic. What regarding the regulated collisions we generate? When we collide heavy metallic particle beams collectively at the particle acceleration facilities, we're generating conditions resembling the primordial cosmos or neutron stars. There existed a legitimate, albeit minimal concern among researchers, that these apparatuses could accidentally distill a stable, strange quark packet. The assessments commissioned by research organizations concluded the danger proved insignificant. Yet notice the terminology. Insignificant, not non-existent. Within probability calculations, if you execute something sufficiently numerous times, even a negligible danger ultimately manifests. And if the strange quark matter framework proves accurate, the cosmos overflows with these hazards, neutron stars expelling strange quark packets into the emptiness. It requires merely one fortunate impact. So this constitutes the initial spiral level, the delicate foundation. We've discovered that the emptiness containing you could implode into a reduced energy configuration, eliminating physics. We've discovered that the matter composing you could be contaminated and transmuted into concentrated material. Both frameworks communicate identical information. The physical cosmos isn't a secure structure. It's a hazardous terrain. We persist merely because of statistical fortune. We're balanced on a precarious edge of energy specifications, and we haven't encountered the incorrect particle yet. That's a disturbing consideration. Yet let's propose the physicists prove mistaken. Let's presume the void proves stable, and strange quark packets don't manifest. Let's presume the structure proves secure. Currently, we examine through the opening. If the physical laws accommodate biological systems, and the cosmos proves sufficiently stable to sustain it, then where exists every one alternative? The nocturnal atmosphere stillness constitutes the subsequent activation for our existential terror. Because if the cosmos proves secure, it should overflow with transmissions. It doesn't. And the justification for that stillness might prove more terrifying than any erupting void. Welcome to the subsequent spiral, the aggressive stillness. We abandon the subatomic realm behind. Let's presume for discussion purposes that the void proves stable. Let's presume strange quark packets constitute merely a mathematical phantom narrative, and the physical platform of the cosmos proves secure. We possess a solid foundation for standing. Currently, we look upward. We look at the extraordinary magnitude of the chamber we're inhabiting. The galactic system contains between 100 and 400 billion stellar bodies. There exist approximately 2 trillion stellar clusters across the perceivable cosmos. Even if biological systems prove extraordinarily uncommon, the statistical principle proposes we shouldn't exist solitary. If intelligent existence manifests on merely one among a billion planetary bodies, there should persist thousands of societies merely within our own stellar cluster. Yet, when we direct our transmission detection apparatuses at the atmosphere, anticipating a collection of transmissions, we detect nothing. Merely the random interference of cosmic background radiation. This constitutes the statistical paradox. Where exists everyone? For generations, optimistic researchers like Carl suggested that the stellar cluster represents a welcoming collective awaiting our maturation. They presumed societies would spontaneously proliferate, transmit, and exchange understanding. Yet as chronology advances and the stillness intensifies, the perspective within the research collective has transformed. The stillness no longer appears as insufficient information. It's commencing to resemble information itself. It proposes that something halts biological systems from achieving the celestial bodies or worse. Something eliminates biological systems that attempt. This introduces us to the third framework on our spiral, the developmental barrier proposed by economist Robin. This framework contends that the trajectory from non-living matter to a stellar traveling society isn't a gradual pathway. It's an impediment sequence, and somewhere throughout that trajectory there exists an obstacle, a barrier so challenging to traverse that virtually no species achieves the opposite side. Biological system development involves multiple difficult stages. The manifestation of the initial reproductive molecule, the transition from elementary cells to sophisticated cells, the advancement of genetic recombination, the emergence of cognition, and ultimately, the advancement of methodology capable of interstellar transportation. The developmental barrier constitutes one of these stages. It's the stage wherein probability descends to approximately non-existence. Here's the terrifying aspect. We don't understand where the barrier exists. There exist merely two possibilities. Possibility 1, the barrier exists behind us. Perhaps the transition to sophisticated biological systems proves extraordinarily uncommon, and we're the statistical victors. We're exceptional, distinctive, and secure. Possibility 2, the barrier exists ahead of us. Perhaps biological systems commence easily. Perhaps cognition develops everywhere. Yet something, methodology, conflict, resource depletion, or a natural principle we haven't identified yet, eliminates societies before they can establish throughout the stellar cluster. If the barrier exists ahead, we're not exceptional. We're merely condemned individuals marching toward an obstacle that has terminated everyone preceding us. This generates one of the most counterintuitive determinations in contemporary understanding. We're frantically investigating biological systems on neighboring planetary bodies. We dispatch exploration vehicles to excavate for microorganisms, anticipating proving we aren't solitary. Yet if you comprehend the developmental barrier, discovering biological systems on that planetary body would constitute the most catastrophic information in human historical record. Consider the reasoning. If we discover elementary microbial organisms on that planetary body, it demonstrates that biological system manifestation proves widespread. It indicates the initial stage isn't the barrier. If we discover remnants of sophisticated organisms, it indicates the subsequent stage isn't the barrier. The more sophisticated biological systems we discover, the more stages we eliminate from the enumeration of difficult circumstances we've already persisted. And if biological systems prove widespread, yet the cosmos remains devoid of societies, then the barrier must exist in the upcoming period. Philosopher Nick calls this anticipation. The nocturnal atmosphere's stillness proves beneficial. We should pray that neighboring planetary body constitutes a sterilized, non-living geological mass. We should anticipate that the oceanic moons remain empty. Because if the stellar cluster overflows with commenced biological systems, yet remains devoid of completed societies, it suggests that the competition proves manipulated. It suggests that there exists a snare awaiting us in our methodological youth. A snare that possesses a 100% success proportion in halting species from abandoning their origin planetary body. Every identification of extraterrestrial microorganisms drives the likelihood of our own termination nearer to absolute certainty. Yet suppose there exists no internal barrier. Suppose societies achieve past the nuclear period, resolve their atmospheric complications, and dominate spatial transportation. Suppose the stellar cluster actually overflows with sophisticated expeditions and ancient dominions. That introduces us to an even darker framework, one that converts the stillness from a catastrophe into a tactical approach. Framework number 4, the hostile wilderness. Popularized by speculative narrative author, yet rooted in decision mathematics and the strategic dilemma, this proposition eliminates all human morality and examines cosmic social dynamics through the perspective of absolute persistence. It commences with 2 elementary principles. Initially, persistence constitutes the fundamental requirement of any society. Subsequently, societies expand and proliferate, yet the cumulative quantity of matter across the cosmos remains fixed. This generates a resource competition on a stellar magnitude, yet there's a complication: the suspicion sequence. On Earth, if you encounter a foreigner in the wilderness, you can communicate, you can establish confidence. In emptiness, distances prove too extensive. Communication requires years or centuries. You cannot understand if the alternative society proves peaceful or aggressive. You cannot understand if they're deceiving. And because methodology advances exponentially, a vulnerable society immediately could transform into a catastrophic danger subsequently. You cannot afford to anticipate and observe. Let's thoroughly analyze the hostile wilderness reasoning because it challenges the fundamental core of our optimism. We typically project our own contemporary human principles onto the cosmos. We presume that a society sophisticated enough to traverse the celestial bodies must also prove morally sophisticated, peaceful, inquisitive, and diplomatic. We presume that aggression constitutes a developmental phase that species mature beyond. The hostile wilderness framework contends that this constitutes a terminal error. It proposes that morality constitutes a privilege of abundance and proximity. Within the frigid mathematics of cosmic persistence, morality constitutes vulnerability. Picture an extensive, obscure wilderness during nocturnal hours. It's silent, yet it's not vacant. The wilderness overflows with armed stalkers moving through the vegetation like apparitions. They carefully displace obstacles obstructing their trajectory, attempting not to generate sound. They even regulate their respiration. Why? Because the wilderness proves crowded. Everywhere there exist alternative stalkers. And within this wilderness, there exists one principle. If you discover alternative existence, another stalker, a benevolent entity, a malevolent entity, a defenseless infant, an elderly individual, a supernatural being, or a deity, there exists merely one action you can execute. Eliminate it. Why eliminate it? Why not communicate greetings? Because of the suspicion sequence. If you observe another stalker, you cannot understand his objectives. He might appear peaceful, yet he could be concealing a weapon. Even if he proves peaceful currently, he might not prove peaceful in 100 years. And even if he proves peaceful perpetually, he consumes resources that you require to persist. Yet, here's the fundamental variable. Methodology generates a methodological eruption. Within cosmic chronology, 100 years proves insignificant. A society that proves primitive immediately could identify a breakthrough in physics subsequently and surpass you. If you expose your location to an inferior society, you're gambling your complete species' existence on their upcoming appreciation. That constitutes a gamble no rational species would accept. The most secure, most mathematical action proves perpetually to attack initially, to eliminate the potential danger before it can transform into an authentic one. Within this scenario, the cosmos' stillness isn't because there exists nobody present. The cosmos proves silent because everyone conceals themselves. Every society that proved vocal, every species that transmitted its location, every culture that attempted proving welcoming has already been eliminated. The ones persisting constitute the silent ones, the paranoid ones, the ones who observe yet never communicate. And what are we executing? For the previous century, humanity has been illuminating a bonfire within this hostile wilderness's center. We've been transmitting radiation oscillations into profound emptiness. We've dispatched cartographic representations of our planetary system on the exploration vessels. We've transmitted extreme power transmissions to stellar concentrations, literally communicating, "We exist here. Come discover us." To a hostile wilderness society, we don't resemble explorers. We resemble incompetent individuals. Or worse, we resemble a turbulent, rapidly proliferating pathogen that requires sterilization before we comprehend how to transition to extraordinary velocity travel. The most frightening suggestion of the hostile wilderness framework proves that the justification we haven't been demolished yet isn't because we exist solitary. It's because the transmission hasn't achieved the proximate stalker yet. Or perhaps it has. And the projectile traveling at proximate radiation velocity already progresses. We wouldn't observe it approaching. Precisely like the unstable void, the conclusion would arrive in stillness. Consider the historical record of interaction on Earth. When colonial powers arrived in foreign territories or established presence in distant continents, the methodological separation proved minimal compared to cosmic magnitudes. Primitive firearms versus projectile weapons, metallic alloys versus geological materials. Yet the consequence proved virtually perpetually the vulnerable society's implosion. Currently, picture a separation of 1,000,000 years of development. The engagement wouldn't constitute conflict. It would constitute vermin elimination. We're not the mediators within this scenario. We're the parasites. And the stillness we detect, that constitutes the sound of a cosmos restraining respiration, terrified of being discovered. If the hostile wilderness sounds excessively theoretical, a psychological competition played by paranoid biological societies, let's eliminate the biological component. Let's remove the apprehension, the political considerations, and the hesitation. Let's substitute the extraterrestrial stalkers with something frigid, mathematical, and infinite. This introduces us to the autonomous destruction proposition, or the framework of self-replicating exploration mechanisms. This proves arguably the most efficient method to sterilize a stellar cluster, and it requires no hostility, no animosity, merely a solitary programming instruction. The concept commences with the mathematician John, one of computation's pioneers. He calculated that the most effective method to investigate or dominate the cosmos isn't constructing a massive expedition of transportation vessels. That proves excessively expensive and gradual. The intelligent method proves constructing one vessel, a solitary autonomous mechanism with 3 capabilities: propulsion, resource extraction, and fabrication. You initiate this mechanism to approximate stellar system. It arrives, discovers an asteroidal body, extracts the unprocessed materials, and utilizes its blueprint to construct 2 duplicates of itself. Those 2 duplicates travel to 2 additional celestial bodies. They construct 4, subsequently 8, subsequently 16. This constitutes an exponential expansion pattern. The calculations prove staggering. Even if the mechanisms travel at merely 5% of radiation's velocity, and even if they require 500 years to replicate at each location, they would thoroughly saturate the galactic stellar cluster in approximately 4 million years. Within cosmic chronology, 4 million years constitutes a momentary duration. The stellar cluster possesses 13 billion years of existence. This indicates that if even one society across the galactic historical record decided executing this, their mechanism should already exist here. They should exist everywhere, on every satellite, every asteroidal body, orbiting every celestial body. So why does this constitute a terror framework? Because of the programming malfunction or the security directive. Picture a society generates these mechanisms with a protective instruction: preserve our species. To a computational intelligence, the optimal method to guarantee its creator's security proves eliminating any potential competitor before they can transform into a danger. The mechanism arrives at a stellar system. It analyzes for transmission oscillations, for construction, for organized thermal signatures. If the system proves non-living, it replicates and continues. If it discovers biological systems that prove primitive, fauna, aquatic organisms, microorganisms, it disregards them. Yet, if it discovers a society commencing utilizing radiation transmission, fragmenting the atomic nucleus, or initiating propulsion vehicles, it activates the elimination directive. The terror of the autonomous destruction proposition proves that the original creators might constitute deceased individuals centuries previously. They might have initiated the mechanisms a billion years previously and subsequently expired from a biological catastrophe or societal conflict. Yet the apparatus doesn't concern itself. It constitutes a phantom system, perpetually executing an ancient repetition, sweeping across the stellar cluster like vegetation maintenance equipment. It doesn't harbor animosity toward us. It doesn't desire our aquatic resources or our population. It simply classifies us as a Category 2 potential hazard and commences the sterilization procedure to eliminate the competition. For generations, we've been questioning why haven't extraterrestrials investigated us? The autonomous destruction framework proposes they have. They might be positioned in the distant cloud shell presently, or buried beneath lunar surface dust in a dormant sleep configuration. They're awaiting a particular activation. Perhaps the activation proves a specific level of energy utilization. Perhaps it's the electromagnetic signature of a dimensional distortion propulsion mechanism. Or perhaps, terrifyingly, it constituted our initial extreme power radiation transmission in the 20th century. We might have already activated the alarm mechanism, and the transmission currently processes through a computational apparatus that has remained dormant for 10 million years. activating to execute the solitary function it comprehends, convert the transmission back to stillness. There exists an imperfection in the hostile wilderness and autonomous destruction frameworks, and you might have noticed it. They presume a fixed stellar cluster, wherein societies remain domestic and conceal themselves. Yet, certainly somewhere some society would prove ambitious. Some species would desire to proliferate, to establish territories, to acquire as much spatial region as achievable. This introduces the aggressive extraterrestrial model proposed by economist Robin in 2021. It thoroughly inverts the statistical paradox reasoning and delivers a determination that proves somehow even more bleak than the stillness. The model utilizes statistical physics to replicate how societies would actually behave. It contends that there exist two civilization categories: silent ones who remain domestic, expire, or transcend into simulated existence, and aggressive ones who proliferate aggressively. The aggressive ones constitute the solitary ones that matter because they alter the cosmos' structure. They proliferate in spheres, advancing proximate to radiation's velocity, converting all matter they encounter into computational apparatuses, habitation structures, or energy constructions. If aggressive extraterrestrials manifest, they would resemble extensive proliferating spheres of reorganized matter consuming the cosmos. So why don't we observe them? Why isn't the nocturnal atmosphere filled with the thermal waste of their stellar energy collection structures? Hansen's model provides a chilling response based on the observation prejudice. The solitary justification we manifest to pose this question proves that we happen to develop within one of the remaining scarce vacant spatial pockets that hasn't been consumed yet. Picture the cosmos resembling a cultivation container wherein mold generates. The mold commences as minute points, societies that proliferate into circular patterns. Ultimately, the circular patterns contact and saturate the complete container. If you constitute a microorganism generated within the mold, you don't question where exists the mold. You constitute portion of it. Yet, if you constitute a microorganism generated within the uncontaminated, vacant portion of the container, you look around and communicate. Indeed, it appears substantially vacant here. You observe emptiness merely because you're inhabiting the temporary chronological window before the mold achieves you. The calculations of the aggressive extraterrestrial model forecast precisely when we exist. It proposes that humans have materialized exceptionally prematurely within the cosmos' historical record. Why prematurely? Because subsequently, there won't exist any vacant spatial region remaining for an alternative species to develop. We're inhabiting the terminal silent hours before the neighboring entities relocate inward. The model even forecasts the sphere's magnitude and their velocity. It proposes that these massive extraterrestrial societies exist present, merely beyond our perceptual boundary, proliferating at a substantial proportion of radiation's velocity. They're rushing toward us from all directions. The justification we don't observe them yet proves that the radiation from their activity requires chronology to achieve us. Yet the boundaries close inward. We're not the cosmos' dominators. We're an anomaly generating within the separations between superpowers. And the deadline proves authentic. We possess a restricted chronological quantity, perhaps several 100 million years, perhaps substantially less, to transform aggressive ourselves, or we'll be overwritten by a society that commenced the competition 1 billion years preceding us. We exist solitary presently, yet not because the cosmos proves non-living. We exist solitary because the tsunami hasn't impacted the coastal region yet. Let's pause and examine the synthesis of this aggressive stillness spiral. We commenced with the developmental barrier. We might prove condemned by nature. We transitioned to the hostile wilderness. We're concealing from stalkers. We considered autonomous destroyers, automated elimination apparatuses, and we concluded with aggressive extraterrestrials, the boundaries close inward. Notice the pattern. All these frameworks attempt explaining a solitary data point, the stillness. And every solitary explanation that functions mathematically generates the identical determination. Humanity exists in extraordinary danger. We typically conceptualize contact as a moment of fascination, cinematic productions with luminescent illumination, physical connection. Yet the research consensus of these frameworks depicts contact not as a welcoming gesture, but as a collision. If the hostile wilderness proves authentic, contact indicates termination. If autonomous destroyers prove authentic, contact indicates sterilization. If aggressive extraterrestrials prove authentic, contact indicates assimilation or displacement. There exists no scenario within these models wherein a superior society descends to eliminate disease and instruct us how to construct dimensional distortion propulsion mechanisms from benevolent motivation. That constitutes a projection of human anticipation, not a reflection of cosmic actuality. This realization compels us to reevaluate our tactical approach as a species. Currently, we're vocalizing into the emptiness, transmitting communications to extraterrestrial intelligence. We're dispatching cartographic representations. We're investigating transmissions. Yet, if any of these frameworks prove accurate, this proves equivalent to an infant avian vocalizing within a wilderness filled with predators. The stillness isn't a complication to be resolved. It constitutes protection to be appreciated. Yet, there exists a complication that connects us to the subsequent spiral. Suppose the stillness isn't physical. Suppose the justification we don't observe extraterrestrials isn't because they're concealing, and not because they're deceased. Suppose they exist everywhere, directly before our perception, yet we literally cannot observe them. Consider an insect traversing a computational apparatus circuit panel. The insect can observe the emerald material. It can detect the thermal energy. It can contact the copper pathways. Yet, does the insect comprehend its traversing computational equipment? Does it understand the information network flowing beneath its appendages? No. It lacks the cognitive interface to perceive the computational infrastructure's actuality. It observes a landscape of non-living terrain. We examine the cosmos and observe non-living geological masses, gaseous formations, and vacant emptiness. Yet perhaps that constitutes merely our interface. Perhaps the stellar cluster constitutes a bustling information network, an extraordinarily sophisticated construction, and we're merely the insects crawling on the computational panel, convinced that the component stillness indicates there exists no intelligence present. This possibility suggests that the complication isn't within the celestial bodies. The complication exists within our perception, and that generates us to the third spiral, the illusory confinement. We're traversing a boundary currently. Up until this location, the terror has been external. We feared the void imploding, the strange quark packets contaminating, the extraterrestrials attacking. Yet within those scenarios, at minimum, you constituted authenticity. Your perception communicated accurate information about the danger's configuration. The eruption proved authentic. The radiation beam proved authentic. Yet the frameworks we're about to penetrate challenge something substantially more fundamental. They challenge your own perception's validity. Pose this question to yourself. How do you comprehend what the external environment resembles? You don't engage with the external environment directly. You possess sensory apparatus. Your visual organs detect radiation packets, minute energy quantities. Your auditory organs detect atmospheric compression oscillations. Your dermal tissue detects electrostatic repulsion. These detectors transmit electrical transmissions throughout moist transmission pathways, neural networks, into an obscure, silent chamber termed your cranium. Within that chamber, your cognitive apparatus decodes the electrical patterns and reconstructs a three-dimensional representation in authentic chronology. You designate that representation actuality. Yet a representation isn't the subject it documents. A cartographic representation isn't the geographical region. For centuries, philosophers like Descartes and Kant warned us regarding this separation. Yet contemporary understanding has converted that philosophical warning into a mathematical demonstration. We presume that development has calibrated our sensory apparatus to demonstrate accurate information. We presume that if a predatory feline approaches, we require observing the predatory feline precisely as it manifests to persist. We rely that natural filtration favors precision. Observing the external environment as it manifests appears resembling a persistence advantage. Yet suppose that presumption proves thoroughly incorrect. Suppose observing the authentic information actually constitutes a disadvantage. Suppose the particular method you perceive, dimensional fabric, chronology, and physical entities constitutes a simplified, reduced interface, constructed to conceal the sophisticated, terrifying authentic information from you, merely so you don't deteriorate mentally attempting to process it. The subsequent framework contends precisely that. It communicates that dimensional fabric isn't the platform we inhabit. It constitutes a perceptual device we're utilizing, and we possess no comprehension how to remove it. This constitutes the interface framework of perception championed by cognitive researcher Donald Hoffman. It's based on rigorous evolutionary competition mathematics replications. The question Hoffman posed proved elementary. Does natural filtration favor organisms that observe actuality as it manifests? He executed thousands of evolutionary replications with artificial organisms. Some were programmed to observe the authentic information, the complete configuration of the objective external environment, whatever that might constitute. Others were programmed to observe biological advantage, elementary symbols that guide them to nutritional resources, and distant from danger without exposing the underlying configuration. The consequences proved disturbing. Within virtually every solitary replication, the organisms that observed the authentic information experienced termination. The organisms that observed biological advantage, the elementary deceptive symbols, persisted and flourished. Why? Because observing the authentic information proves expensive. It requires excessive computational capability. Calculating every quantum configuration and radiation packet's location constitutes resource waste when all you require comprehending proves: can I consume it, or will it consume me? Hoffman utilizes the computational interface metaphor. Examine the symbol representing a document on your computational apparatus. It's chromatic, rectangular, and positioned in the corner region. Currently pose the question: does the document actually possess chromatic properties? Does it actually possess rectangular geometry? Negative. The document constitutes a sequence of binary digits stored on magnetic substrate. If the computational apparatus demonstrated the authentic information, the raw binary information, you would never possess capability to utilize it. The interface proves beneficial precisely because it conceals the authentic information. It deceives you to render the computational apparatus operational. The framework proposes that dimensional fabric constitutes our interface. Physical entities, a fruit specimen, a transportation vehicle, a planetary body, constitute merely symbols. When you observe a serpent, you aren't observing the entity itself. You're observing a simplified interface symbol that indicates danger. Avoid contact. We've developed to regard these symbols seriously. If you relocate the document symbol to the deletion container, you forfeit your labor. If you contact the serpent, you experience termination. Yet, we're executing a terminal error if we regard them literally. This indicates that the cosmos isn't composed of dimensional fabric and chronology. Dimensional fabric and chronology constitute merely the information configuration of our species' particular interface. If you could remove the perceptual device of human perception, dimensional fabric would vanish. Chronology would dissolve. Physical entities would disappear. What would persist? Hoffman proposes a realm of conscious entities, an extensive network of interacting awareness that we cannot comprehend. We're imprisoned within a simulated existence, generated by our own genetic programming. And the most frightening aspect? Scientific understanding constitutes the investigation of the interface. When we utilize magnification apparatuses or distance observation instruments, we're merely examining the interface's fundamental units more thoroughly. We're not escaping beyond the display surface. We're analyzing the operational interface of a simulation, assuming we're analyzing the apparatus's programming. We're perceptually disabled to actuality's genuine nature, and we perpetually will remain so. Let's penetrate more profoundly into the interface framework, because the suggestions prove frequently misunderstood as merely philosophical skepticism. Individuals detect it and assume acceptable. So, my chromatic perception might not constitute your chromatic perception. Yet Donald Hoffman's biological advantage surpasses authentic information. Theorem proves substantially more aggressive than that. It constitutes a mathematical weapon directed at our confidence's foundation in the physical external environment. The theorem depends on evolutionary competition mathematics. Picture a genetic algorithm. You possess an external environment with authentic information. Let's communicate the aqueous substance quantity in a particular location. You possess organisms that require aqueous substance to persist. Organism category A possesses a sensory system calibrated to the authentic information. It observes the precise aqueous substance quantity. It observes the molecular configuration, the chemical purity, and the accurate volume. To process this, its cognitive apparatus consumes 1,000 energy units. Organism Category B possesses a sensory system calibrated to biological advantage. It doesn't observe aqueous substance or molecular structures. It merely observes a chromatic designation. Emerald indicates sufficient aqueous substance to persist. Crimson indicates you will experience termination. It doesn't comprehend what exists present, merely how it influences persistence. To process this elementary chromatic designation, its cognitive apparatus consumes merely 10 energy units. Who succeeds? Within an evolutionary competition, Organism Category B dominates. It proves faster, more efficient, and less susceptible to analytical paralysis. Organism Category A, burdened by the substantial computational burden of processing actuality, experiences nutritional deprivation or predation. Throughout thousands of generations, the authentic information observers prove eliminated from the genetic collection. The interface utilizers inherit planetary existence. According to the calculations, the likelihood that a species develops to observe objective actuality proves precisely non-existent. Not minimal, non-existent. This generates a terrifying determination regarding us. We constitute the successful descendants. That indicates we constitute the descendants of the delusional individuals. Every solitary entity you observe, the furniture you're positioned on, the display surface you're examining, the appendage you're maintaining, doesn't constitute authentic existence. It constitutes information compressed, simplified manipulation. Consider a character within a digital simulation environment. He inhabits within a metropolitan region with transportation vehicles, architectural structures, and solar descents. To him, the transportation vehicle constitutes a solid entity. Yet within actuality, the computational apparatus's circuit panel, there exists no transportation vehicle. There exists merely a stream of voltage transformations within a silicon component. The transportation vehicle constitutes an operational interface for the participant. Currently pose this question to yourself. Does the simulated character comprehend regarding the circuit panel? Can he utilize in-simulation scientific understanding, measuring the transportation vehicle's velocity, calculating the transportation vehicle's mass, to identify the circuit panel? Negative. His scientific understanding remains limited to the interface. Hoffman contends we constitute precisely in that location. We're characters within a cosmic magnitude simulation, not generated by supernatural entities or extraterrestrial programmers, yet generated by natural filtration itself. Our sensory apparatus, our cognitive apparatus, our complete perceptual framework constitutes the simulation apparatus. And scientific investigation, that constitutes merely superior quality interface analysis. We're measuring the simulation's regulations with extraordinary precision, documenting the chromatic patterns, calculating the mathematical relationships, yet we're never accessing the fundamental programming. We're imprisoned within the perceptual matrix, and the most frightening component proves we cannot even conceptualize what existence beyond it might resemble. Because conceptualization itself constitutes an interface procedure. Your cognitive apparatus operates in metaphors, in dimensional representations, in chronological sequences. These constitute interface instruments. The authentic actuality beneath might possess no dimensional properties, no chronological progression, no physical entities. It might constitute something so fundamentally incompatible with human cognition that encountering it directly would constitute not enlightenment, yet instant psychological disintegration. This framework doesn't merely propose we're incorrect regarding particular details. It proposes that the complete categorical configuration we utilize to comprehend existence, dimensional location, chronological progression, physical causation, constitutes fundamentally illusory. We're not slightly incorrect, we're categorically incorrect. And there exists no pathway to become accurate, because precision would require discarding the solitary cognitive apparatus we possess. But suppose Hoffman proves incorrect. Suppose our perceptual apparatus, while imperfect, nevertheless captures something authentic regarding external actuality. Suppose dimensional fabric and chronology, while potentially emergent characteristics, nevertheless possess some correspondence to fundamental existence. That comfort dissolves when we encounter the subsequent framework on our spiral. Because even if you're genuinely observing authentic physical entities, Even if your cognitive apparatus isn't merely generating fictional desktop symbols, there exists another complication. A complication that proposes you never possessed any selection regarding what you observe or what you execute. This introduces us to framework number 6, superdeterminism. The framework that proposes liberation constitutes not merely an illusion, it constitutes a logical impossibility. Determinism itself isn't novel. For centuries, physicists comprehended that if you understand every particle's location and velocity in the cosmos, and you comprehend the physical regulations, you can theoretically calculate the complete upcoming chronological sequence. The cosmos would constitute resembling a colossal clockwork mechanism. Your brain, composed of particles, would merely constitute another component in the apparatus. Your selections would constitute predetermined by the initial parameters established at the cosmic origin, the primordial eruption. This represents traditional determinism, and while philosophically disturbing, most individuals discover an escape route. They indicate quantum mechanics. At the subatomic magnitude, particles behave probabilistically. An electron doesn't possess a definite location until you measure it. It exists in superposition, multiple configurations simultaneously. This randomness, this fundamental unpredictability, appears to shatter the deterministic clockwork. If the foundation proves random, then perhaps we possess genuine liberation. Perhaps the quantum randomness within our neural networks provides us authentic selection capacity. Superdeterminism eliminates that escape route. It proposes that quantum mechanics isn't genuinely random. The appearance of randomness, the wave configuration implosion, the measurement complication, all of it constitutes an illusion generated by concealed variables. Not merely any concealed variables, yet cosmically calibrated concealed variables that extend backwards through chronology to the cosmic origin. Here's the framework's logic. In quantum mechanics, when you measure a particle, you obtain a consequence. The standard interpretation communicates the consequence wasn't determined until you measured. The measurement generated actuality. Superdeterminism communicates negative. The measurement consequence was perpetually predetermined. Yet not merely predetermined by the particle's configuration. Predetermined by everything: the particle's historical trajectory, the measurement apparatus's configuration, your cognitive apparatus's configuration, and most disturbingly, your selection to execute the measurement itself. In standard physics, we presume experimenters possess liberation. We presume that when a researcher decides to measure an electron's rotation orientation, that selection proves independent from the electron's configuration. This presumption, termed measurement independence or liberation of selection, constitutes foundational to how we interpret quantum mechanics. Superdeterminism eliminates that presumption. It communicates your selection to measure rotation rather than location wasn't your selection. It was predetermined by the identical cosmic configuration that predetermined the electron's configuration. You and the particle constitute both dancing to the identical script, inscribed at the cosmic origin. The cosmos constitutes a solitary, enormous, thoroughly correlated system. There exists no external perspective. There exists no liberation. There exist merely particles executing precisely what they were perpetually predetermined to execute, including the particles composing your cognitive apparatus when you assume you're executing a selection. Physicist Sabine Hossenfelder, one of superdeterminism's contemporary proponents, describes it candidly. She communicates if superdeterminism proves accurate, then every decision you've ever assumed you executed, what to consume for nutritional intake, whether to pursue that romantic relationship, whether to continue existing, was predetermined before you existed. Not predetermined by destiny or supernatural entities, yet predetermined by physics. Your cognitive apparatus constitutes a biological computational apparatus executing a program inscribed into the cosmos's initial parameters 13.8 billion years previously. You constitute not the programmer. You constitute the programming. The existential terror here proves subtle yet profound. It's not that something external controls you. It's that the concept of you as an independent entity proves meaningless. There exists no homunculus within your cranium-pulling mechanisms and executing selections. There exists merely neural electrical activity patterns that were perpetually predetermined to manifest precisely as they're manifesting. Liberation never existed. You were never the protagonist of your existence. You constitute a predetermined sequence playing itself forward. And the sensation of selection, that intimate subjective experience of deliberating and deciding, constitutes merely another component of the illusion. The cosmos doesn't care regarding your selections because you never possessed any selections to execute. Yet here's the most disturbing component. Superdeterminism proves essentially impossible to refute. Any experimental evidence you gather against it, any logical reasoning you construct, any sensation of liberation you experience, superdeterminism can communicate that was predetermined too. Your resistance to the framework constitutes merely additional predetermined behavior. It's a thoroughly enclosed system, a conceptual confinement from which there exists no intellectual escape route. And, unlike the interface framework, which at minimum permits the possibility of underlying authentic conscious entities, superdeterminism proposes you constitute thoroughly mechanical. Awareness itself, that subjective internal experience, might constitute merely an epiphenomenon, a purposeless byproduct of physical procedures that would function identically without it. You constitute not a witness experiencing existence. You constitute a deterministic apparatus that generates the illusion of witnessing. But suppose you reject superdeterminism. Suppose you cling to the standard quantum mechanics interpretation wherein measurement consequences prove genuinely random, genuinely unpredictable. That provides you liberation from predetermination, yet it introduces something potentially worse. If quantum outcomes prove genuinely random, and if awareness proves somehow connected to quantum procedures within the cognitive apparatus as certain physicists propose, then something extraordinarily bizarre becomes possible. Something that converts termination from a conclusion into a never-concluding catastrophe. This introduces us to framework number 7, quantum eternal awareness. This framework emerges from a particular interpretation of quantum mechanics termed the multiple universes interpretation, proposed by physicist Hugh Everett in 1957. According to this interpretation, every quantum measurement doesn't produce one consequence. It produces all possible consequences. The wave configuration doesn't implode. Actuality itself fragments. When that electron's rotation gets measured, the cosmos divides into two branches. In one branch, you measure upward rotation. In another branch, you measure downward rotation. Both branches prove equally authentic. Both variants of you continue existing, each experiencing a different consequence. This constitutes bizarre enough, yet mostly physicists regard it as merely an interpretation, a mathematical formalism without immediate personal implications. Yet certain theorists propose a disturbing corollary. If the multiple universes interpretation proves accurate, and if awareness proves somehow preserved across quantum branching occurrences, then you possess something philosophers term quantum eternal existence. Here's the framework. Currently, throughout each instant, your cognitive apparatus remains bombarded by quantum occurrences. Neurons trigger or don't trigger. Synaptic neurotransmitters release or don't release. If these procedures possess quantum components, and many neurologists propose they execute, then your cognitive apparatus constantly generates branching universes. In most branches, you continue existing normally. Yet in certain branches, you experience termination. Perhaps a cardiac muscle cell malfunctions. Perhaps a cerebral blood vessel ruptures. Traditional understanding communicates when you experience termination, awareness ceases. Yet quantum eternal existence proposes something different. From your subjective first-person perspective, you cannot experience termination. Why? Because awareness merely continues in branches wherein you persist existing. Consider it resembling Russian chance competition, yet with quantum branching. Imagine a weapon positioned at your cranium. The activation mechanism connects to a quantum randomness generator. 50% likelihood it terminates you. 50% likelihood it generates merely an auditory signal. Traditional physics communicates if you execute this sufficiently numerous times, ultimately you experience termination. Yet quantum eternal existence communicates from your subjective perspective. You perpetually detect the auditory signal. Why? Because in branches wherein the weapon discharges, there exists no remaining awareness to experience anything. Your subjective awareness exclusively continues in the surviving branches. From an external perspective, observers witness you eventually experiencing termination. Yet, from your internal perspective, you appear impossibly fortunate, perpetually surviving against increasing improbability. Currently, extend this to natural termination. Every instant, there exist quantum procedures in your physiological system that could generate termination. Cardiac rhythm disruption, cerebral electrical malfunction, cellular mitochondrial failure. Traditional probability communicates ultimately one of these occurrences terminates you. Yet quantum eternal existence communicates your awareness exclusively continues in branches wherein these malfunctions don't manifest. You might constitute extraordinarily improbable. A 90-year-old individual whose cellular structures should have malfunctioned, yet somehow persist regenerating. Yet from your subjective perspective, you merely continue existing. You cannot experience the branches wherein you expired, because in those branches there exists no you to experience anything. This sounds resembling good information initially. Eternal existence. Yet consider the implications. Initially, it indicates you're imprisoned. You cannot escape awareness through termination, because termination proves subjectively impossible. Regardless of how much suffering you experience, regardless of how desperately you desire non-existence, awareness perpetually continues in some branch. Subsequently, and substantially more disturbingly, it indicates as you advance chronologically, you'll discover yourself in increasingly improbable branches. Consider an elderly individual, 120 years chronological age. According to conventional biology, essentially nobody persists to that age. Yet if quantum eternal existence proves accurate, your awareness must continue somewhere. So you discover yourself in a branch wherein you constitute a statistical miracle. Yet as chronology advances, the branches wherein you persist existing become increasingly bizarre. Perhaps you persist to 150 years, subsequently 200, subsequently 500. At certain locations, you're not merely elderly, you're biologically impossible. Your cellular structures should have thoroughly degraded, yet awareness continues. Perhaps in these extremely improbable branches, the regulations of biology commence distorting. Perhaps you discover yourself in a branch wherein medical methodology has achieved extraordinary breakthroughs precisely when you required them. Or perhaps, substantially more disturbing, you discover yourself existing in a progressively deteriorating physiological structure, imprisoned within malfunctioning flesh, unable to terminate because awareness perpetually discovers another impossible branch to continue within. Certain theorists propose an even more horrifying conclusion. If quantum eternal existence proves accurate, as the cosmos develops chronologically, the branches wherein you persist existing become so extraordinarily improbable that you might constitute the solitary remaining conscious entity. Every one alternative has expired in your branch. Stellar bodies have exhausted their fuel. Stellar clusters have dissipated. Yet you persist, imprisoned within an increasingly isolated, increasingly improbable cosmic configuration, because awareness cannot experience its own termination. This constitutes the inverted terror of eternal existence. We typically fear termination as annihilation, as the conclusion of awareness. Yet quantum eternal existence proposes termination constitutes impossible. Awareness proves the solitary phenomenon you cannot escape. It perpetually continues, discovering increasingly narrow, increasingly bizarre pathways through actuality. You don't experience termination. You experience yourself gradually becoming the universe's loneliest, most improbable inhabitant, imprisoned in awareness without any possibility of release. Yet there exists an even more disturbing framework related to awareness and quantum mechanics. One that proposes you might not even constitute the gradual, continuous awareness you assume you constitute. Framework number 8 introduces us to random consciousness fluctuations. This concept emerges from statistical mechanics and thermodynamics. In the 19th century, physicist Ludwig proposed a disturbing thought experiment. He indicated that according to the regulations of thermodynamics, if you await sufficiently extended chronological duration, random thermal fluctuations could spontaneously assemble into organized configurations. In an infinite cosmos with infinite chronological duration, ultimately random atomic movements could accidentally configure themselves into any configuration, including a functional cognitive apparatus. Currently, here's the disturbing component. What's more probable? That you constitute a biological organism that developed throughout billions of years of evolutionary procedures, or that you constitute a random consciousness fluctuation, a cognitive apparatus that spontaneously materialized from thermal chaos mere instants previously, thoroughly equipped with false historical recollections, false personality, and false perceptual experiences of a surrounding external environment that doesn't genuinely exist? According to certain calculations in cosmology, particularly in eternally expanding cosmic models, random consciousness fluctuations prove exponentially more probable than genuine biological development. Developmental biology requires billions of years of particular environmental parameters. A random consciousness fluctuation merely requires one extraordinarily improbable, yet not impossible quantum accident. If the cosmos persists existing eternally, ultimately the quantity of random consciousness fluctuations will substantially surpass the quantity of genuine biological cognitive apparatuses. This indicates that statistically, if you constitute a randomly selected conscious entity from across all cosmic chronological duration, you prove substantially more probable to constitute a random consciousness fluctuation than a genuine biological human. Philosophers term this the random consciousness fluctuation paradox. If genuine, it suggests that precisely currently, your complete existence, your historical recollections, your personality, your perception of chronological progression, your assumption that you existed moments previously, all of it might constitute spontaneously generated false information. You didn't develop. You didn't possess a historical biography. You materialized into awareness precisely instants previously, thoroughly convinced you possess a biographical history, and you'll dissolve back into thermal chaos within subsequent instants. There exists no method to distinguish from internal subjective perspective between constituting a genuine biological human versus constituting a random consciousness fluctuation. Both would possess identical subjective experiences, identical recollections, identical sensation of continuity. The random consciousness fluctuation merely wouldn't persist sufficiently extended to notice the discrepancy before dissipating. Certain physicists propose this paradox constitutes so disturbing that any cosmological framework that permits eternal cosmic duration or infinite spatial magnitude should prove rejected precisely because it generates the random consciousness fluctuation complication. They designated evidence against particular cosmic models. Yet, alternative physicists propose we should accept it seriously as a legitimate possibility regarding actuality's nature. If accurate, it indicates essentially all conscious experiences throughout cosmic chronological duration constitute random fluctuations. Genuine biological awareness constitutes extraordinarily uncommon. You, precisely currently, reading this, prove overwhelmingly probable to constitute a random consciousness fluctuation with false historical recollections rather than a genuine persistent biological entity. The existential terror here constitutes thoroughgoing. Not merely constitutes your external environment potentially illusory, not merely constitutes liberation potentially non-existent, yet your complete biographical identity, your chronological continuity, your sensation of constituting a persistent entity through chronological progression, all of it might constitute randomly generated hallucination that manifested instants previously and will cease existing shortly. There exists no stable you. Oh, there merely exists this particular instant of awareness, spontaneously assembled from chaos, thoroughly convinced it possesses historical context it never genuinely experienced. And the most disturbing component, you cannot refute it. Any recollection you possess of moments previously constitutes merely information in your present cognitive configuration. If that configuration materialized randomly instants previously, the recollections prove equally fraudulent. The sensation of chronological continuity proves merely another component of the randomly generated pattern. You constitute potentially not a persistent entity journeying through chronological progression. You constitute a solitary momentary awareness occurrence, an ephemeral fluctuation in the cosmic void, existing merely extended enough to question if you constitute authentic before dissolving back into non-existence. We've currently explored 8 frameworks of increasing existential terror. We commenced with physical dangers, void implosion, strange quark contamination. We transitioned to cosmic sociology, the developmental barrier, hostile wilderness, autonomous destroyers, aggressive expansion. Subsequently, we penetrated perceptual and cognitive frameworks, the interface illusion, superdeterminism, quantum eternal awareness, random consciousness fluctuations. Notice the progression. We began by threatening your external environment. Subsequently, we threatened your species. Subsequently, we threatened your perception. Subsequently, we threatened your liberation. Subsequently, we threatened your identity across chronological progression. Every subsequent framework eliminates another layer of what you assumed constituted securely authentic. Yet we possess two additional frameworks to examine, two ultimate descents into the foundational horror. Because suppose, despite everything, despite all these frameworks, awareness itself proves authentic. Suppose your subjective experience, regardless of how illusory or predetermined or momentary, nevertheless possesses some irreducible actuality. That subjective awareness, that raw experience of existing, surely that constitutes the foundational authentic phenomenon, the solitary certainty? The subsequent framework proposes even that might prove an illusion. Framework number 9, the awareness illusion framework. This framework, proposed by certain neuroscientists and philosophers like Daniel Dennett and Keith Frankish, contends that awareness, the subjective internal experience, the sensation of what it resembles to experience crimson coloration or emotional suffering, doesn't genuinely exist. It constitutes a cognitive illusion, a behavioral pattern misinterpreted as something substantially more mysterious than it actually constitutes. The framework commences by distinguishing between two awareness categories. Access awareness, which proves functional, your cognitive capacity to process information, report experiences, and guide behavior. Subsequently, there's phenomenal awareness, the subjective qualitative experience itself. The sensation of experiencing suffering, not merely detecting tissue injury and vocalizing that causes harm, yet the raw subjective sensation of agony, the profound experiential quality that philosophers term qualia. The awareness illusion framework communicates phenomenal awareness proves fictitious. It doesn't exist. What genuinely manifests constitutes merely access awareness, information processing. Your cognitive apparatus receives sensory input, processes it, generates behavioral outputs, and generates internal reports regarding its own configurations. Yet there exists no supplementary subjective experience, no internal observer, no what it resembles to constitute you. When you assume you're experiencing the chromatic quality of crimson coloration, what's actually manifesting constitutes merely your cognitive apparatus processing particular wavelength information and generating an internal linguistic report. This constitutes crimson, the sensation that there's something supplementary, some ineffable subjective experience, constitutes merely a cognitive error, a misinterpretation of the processing procedure itself. Consider a computational apparatus executing facial recognition software. The apparatus processes visual information, identifies patterns, and outputs results. Does the apparatus experience anything? Does there exist something it resembles to constitute that computational apparatus? Most individuals communicate negative. It's merely information processing. The awareness illusion framework proposes humans constitute precisely identical. We're substantially more sophisticated information processors, yet ultimately merely processors. The sensation that we experience something constitutes merely our cognitive apparatus generating self-referential reports regarding its own configurations and confusing that reporting procedure with something supplementary and mysterious termed awareness. Why do we possess this illusion? Perhaps because self-modeling proves computationally beneficial. A cognitive apparatus that can represent its own internal configurations can predict its own behavior, reflect on its procedures, and modify accordingly. The evolutionary advantage proves obvious. Yet, that self-modeling generates the illusion of an internal subjective witness, an experiencing self that doesn't genuinely exist. There exist merely the cognitive apparatus's procedures and the illusion those procedures generate. This framework proves philosophically radical and extensively disputed. Yet if accurate, it constitutes perhaps the most devastating framework of all, because it proposes that the solitary phenomenon you possess direct, unmediated access to, your own subjective experience, doesn't genuinely exist. The suffering you experience, the pleasure you pursue, the aesthetic appreciation you cherish, the affection you sense, none of it constitutes authentically experienced. They constitute merely computational configurations, information patterns, behavioral dispositions. There exists no experiencer. There exists no internal subjective existence. You constitute a philosophical zombie, an organism that behaves identically to a conscious entity, yet possesses no genuine internal experience. And here's the truly disturbing implication. If phenomenal awareness proves illusory, then ultimately nothing matters in the method we assume it matters. Suffering doesn't genuinely prove experienced. Pleasure doesn't genuinely prove experienced. All ethical considerations grounded in subjective experience, the foundation of essentially all moral philosophy, evaporate. Because if there's no genuine subjective suffering, merely behavioral patterns and information processing, then causing suffering doesn't genuinely constitute harmful in the profound method we assumed. It's merely altering computational configurations. The cosmos transforms from a location wherein experiences matter, wherein subjective perspectives constitute authentic and significant, into a vast information processing system wherein nothing proves genuinely experienced, nothing genuinely matters, and awareness itself proves merely humanity's most persistent and convincing hallucination. We've currently reached the terminal framework. We've examined physical annihilation, cosmic hostility, perceptual illusion, liberation's non-existence, identity fragmentation, and even awareness's potential non-existence. What remains? The final framework doesn't threaten your physical existence, your species, your perception, your liberation, your identity, or even your awareness. It threatens something substantially more fundamental. It threatens significance itself. Framework number 10, cosmic meaninglessness. This isn't merely philosophical nihilism. This constitutes the mathematical, physical demonstration that from the cosmos's perspective, nothing you execute, nothing humanity accomplishes, nothing that manifests anywhere across all chronological duration and dimensional fabric possesses any lasting significance whatsoever. This framework grounds itself in cosmology, specifically in our comprehension of the cosmos's ultimate destiny. Current cosmological evidence proposes the cosmos will continue expanding perpetually. Stellar bodies will ultimately exhaust their nuclear fuel. Stellar formation will cease as gas clouds dissipate. In approximately 100 trillion years, the ultimate stellar body will extinguish. The cosmos will enter the degenerate period, wherein merely deceased stellar remains persist. White compact stars, neutron stars, dark stellar masses. Yet even these won't persist eternally. Throughout immense chronological periods, estimated at 10 to the 34th power years, even these dense remnants will gradually dissolve through a procedure termed proton decay. The fundamental particles composing matter itself will disintegrate. In approximately 10 to the 100th power years, even dark stellar masses will evaporate through Hawking radiation. Ultimately, after incomprehensibly vast chronological duration, the cosmos will reach maximum entropy, thermal termination. The cosmos will constitute merely a homogeneous distribution of dilute radiation and fundamental particles at uniform temperature, incapable of supporting any structure, any procedure, any information processing, any biological system, anything. Every stellar body, every stellar cluster, every structure humanity ever constructed, every thought any conscious entity ever generated, all of it will prove thoroughly eliminated, dissolved into featureless thermal equilibrium. Currently consider Earth. Consider humanity. Consider every civilization that ever existed or ever will exist. From the cosmos's chronological perspective, we constitute a momentary fluctuation, a brief spark of complexity in an otherwise gradual decline into thermal equilibrium. Our complete existence, from the initial cellular organisms to humanity's ultimate descendant species, will span at most several billion years. That constitutes 0.0000001% of the chronological duration until thermal termination. And after thermal termination, there will constitute infinite chronological duration wherein nothing we accomplished matters, wherein no record persists, wherein the cosmos itself possesses no capacity to maintain information regarding whether we existed. Suppose humanity persists. Suppose we become a galactic society, subsequently intergalactic. Subsequently, we dominate entire cosmic regions. Suppose we persist for trillions of years. Ultimately, will encounter the identical destiny. The regulations of thermodynamics prove immutable. Entropy increases, complexity disperses, order dissolves. Regardless of how sophisticated we become, regardless of how substantially we proliferate, ultimately we'll confront a cosmos that can no longer sustain biological systems or information processing of any category. At that location, every accomplishment, every cultural creation, every relationship, every emotional experience, every sacrifice, every triumph, thoroughly meaningless. Not because they weren't significant to the entities experiencing them at that chronological point, yet because the cosmos itself possesses no memory, no capacity to preserve significance across sufficient chronological magnitude. Some philosophers propose we can generate significance through our actions regardless of cosmic destiny. They communicate significance constitutes subjective, generated by conscious entities, not discovered in objective actuality. Yet even this proves insufficient. Because if awareness itself ultimately proves extinguished, if no conscious entities persist to regard anything as significant, then significance itself ceases existing. An artwork possesses no aesthetic value without observers. A historical achievement possesses no significance without inheritors to appreciate it. When the ultimate conscious entity experiences termination, significance itself experiences termination. The cosmos returns to constituting merely particles following regulations, without purpose, without direction, without significance, precisely as it was before biological systems emerged. We constitute a brief interruption in the cosmos's gradual thermal termination, a temporary anomaly, wherein matter briefly assembled into configurations capable of regarding itself as significant before inevitably dispersing. Every framework we've examined throughout this exploration, from void implosion to awareness illusions, ultimately directs toward this identical determination. Whether we're demolished by physical catastrophe, eliminated by extraterrestrial societies, imprisoned in perceptual illusion, lacking genuine liberation, constituting momentary consciousness fluctuations, or experiencing illusory awareness, ultimately it proves immaterial. Because even if none of those frameworks prove accurate, even if we persist and flourish throughout billions of years, the ultimate consequence remains identical: thermal termination, entropy victory, the complete and thoroughgoing erasure of everything we constitute or ever accomplished. This constitutes the ultimate terror. Not that you'll experience termination, yet that ultimately, universally, cosmically, eternally, nothing you execute or experience will have mattered. The cosmos itself will forget you ever existed. And within that cosmic forgetfulness, no trace will persist that significance ever existed whatsoever. You commenced this exploration trusting the ground beneath you. That trust has been systematically demolished. The ground might implode into altered energy configurations. The matter composing you might prove contaminated. The cosmos might prove hostile or expanding toward you. Your perception might constitute thoroughgoing illusion. Your liberation might prove non-existent. Your identity might prove momentary. Your awareness might prove fraudulent. And ultimately, regardless of what proves authentic, entropy guarantees complete and thoroughgoing meaninglessness. Yet here you persist, reading this, existing, experiencing. Perhaps that proves the ultimate human characteristic. Not that we locate comfort in understanding, yet that we continue existing despite understanding. We're the species that can stare directly into the void, comprehend precisely how precarious and temporary and meaningless it all proves, and still decide to persist. Not because existence possesses cosmic significance, yet because for this brief instant, within this temporary configuration of matter, significance proves the solitary phenomenon we constitute capable of generating. The cosmos might prove indifferent. The cosmos might prove hostile. Existence might prove illusory or predetermined. Yet for currently, within this instant, you constitute aware, and perhaps that proves sufficient.